right. Welcome back, everyone. This is Plant-Based Kidney Health. And as always, I'm Dr. Sean Hashmi with my partner, Michele Crosmer. And we are here to answer all of your questions. So with that, let's dive into today's topic, which is all going to be about plant-based diet for dialysis, including things like how do you learn the benefits, the risk, what about the vitamins, and all sorts of fun stuff. So, Michele, let's dive right into this with the first question that we had, which was really, what are some of those specific nutrient concerns that people should know about when they're on dialysis? And when it comes to things like nutrition therapy, what are sort of those key concepts that we really want our audience to know about?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. And most renal dietitians actually work in dialysis. I know I started off working in dialysis. Now I'm in private practice. I'm working outside of dialysis. But at least in the United States, I think one of the biggest perks is that there are renal dietitians that are part of dialysis units and dialysis clinics. But overall, when we think of nutrition therapy and nutrition, support for people on dialysis, there's kind of several things we're looking at. One is that we want to prevent malnutrition, prevent or help treat malnutrition. We know that dialysis is, it's a life-sustaining treatment, but it is hard on the body. People have higher protein needs. They can lose a lot of different water-soluble vitamins through the process of dialysis. It's this chronic state of inflammation and stress on the body and difficult on the heart. And so with nutrition, we want to help prevent and treat malnutrition. We want to ensure that people are, we're helping their labs, especially nutrition-related labs, be well controlled and within a normal range. So we're looking at especially things like potassium and phosphorus in that sense. And fluid balance and fluid control is a big part too of nutrition therapy. So as people have kidney failure, not everyone on dialysis, but sometimes eventually people who are on dialysis stop urinating or they don't urinate as much, and that fluid can start to build up in between their treatments. And so fluid, having to restrict how much fluid they take in, and that relates to the sodium and even their blood sugar levels. So there's so many things. But from a macronutrient standpoint, one of the main things we're looking at is protein, like I had mentioned. And so the biggest difference between someone that has kidney disease that is on dialysis and someone who is not on dialysis that is looking to, slow or delay the progression to end-stage renal disease is people on dialysis do have higher protein needs. Typically, again, it's not like this crazy, insane amount higher, but it's usually about 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight. Again, I want to emphasize that this is in kilograms. So if you were out there with your calculator and you're trying to figure that out, it's not your weight in pounds, it's your weight in kilograms, which you can get if you take your weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2, that'll give you your weight in kilograms. So protein needs are a little bit higher. And then again, sodium, we still want a low sodium diet, usually less than 2,000 milligrams of sodium. That's to help make sure that fluid gains in between treatments are well controlled, and blood pressure is well controlled. There's less swelling, less edema. So sodium's part of it. And then potassium. So unfortunately, potassium can become more difficult to control potassium blood levels for people who are on dialysis, depending on the type of dialysis. So someone who is doing a home therapy like peritoneal or home hemodialysis, they're getting dialyzed more frequently. And so oftentimes, again, that potassium is being removed and cleaned from the blood. And so they might have a more liberalized diet, but the traditional in-center hemodialysis where someone's treated 3 days a week, 3 to 4 hours, that potassium can start to build up in the blood. And so potassium is often restricted for these people. And then phosphorus is another thing. We've talked about phosphorus in past episodes, but controlling phosphorus levels with diet as well as with phosphorus binders is a big part of nutrition therapy for people that are on dialysis. And then the other thing too, and this comes into play with, malnutrition, but we are looking as well at reducing overall inflammation and oxidative stress. There is, like we said, there's a stress and strain and chronic inflammation with people with end-stage kidney disease. And so we want to aim to get foods in the diet that are anti-inflammatory, contain antioxidants, that contain fiber to help promote normal bowel movements, better gut health, all of these things so that we can improve inflammation. And one of the biggest things that I remember being so frustrating when I worked in dialysis is that, we're looking at albumin in the blood, which is oftentimes low in people who are on dialysis. And it used to be this like hard drilled, like if you eat more protein and you eat more animal protein, that your albumin will go up. And that really is not the case and not what we see. We need to ensure people are getting enough protein, and they do have slightly higher protein needs, but that doesn't mean it has to come from animal sources. It can still come from plant sources. It could be a combination of both. But I've worked with plenty of people on plant-based diets, plant-predominant diets that are on dialysis who we ensure they're getting enough protein, but it's still a very anti-inflammatory diet where we see good albumin levels because, again, albumin levels can be low from infection, illness, inflammation, oxidative stress. And so that's another thing that we're looking at. So overall, we want to, the other thing too is that we know that people with kidney disease in general, but especially with kidney failure, the cardiovascular events are what we want to prevent from happening. We want to help improve cardiovascular health so that people live longer on dialysis, and also so that they are better candidates to get a transplant and hopefully then get off of dialysis. And so a big part of nutrition therapy is helping people to overall have a better quality of life, to have more energy, to be better candidates to then go into surgery and hopefully get a transplant. So then that, in the future, they're no longer on dialysis anymore.
That's excellent.
Yeah. So lots of things with that. And since I mentioned and we're dive more, of course, into specifics of how a plant-based diet can be used for people on dialysis, but what for people specifically now in that on dialysis with a plant-based diet, what are some of the potential benefits of it? And are there any risks or things that we need to be concerned about in this population?
Yeah. So when we look at plant-based diets in dialysis patients, it used to be that we didn't have a lot of data in this area, but now we do. So let me give you 6 key benefits. And these are really important as you're thinking about shifting towards more plants. So the first one is it really starts from when you eat the food and it goes in your gut. So as it goes into your gut, what we know is that the type of gut bacteria that's helpful to us is things like bifidobacterium, is things like lactobacillus, and both of these strains of bacteria is what plant-based diets actually promote. So this really matters because if you have the wrong type of gut bacteria, you're actually going to end up generating lots of uremic toxins. So that goes to the second part. So the second benefit of a plant-based diet is that you actually reduce or make less uremic toxins, things like indoxyl sulfate, p-cresyl sulfate. These are toxins that are actually formed inside your gut, and then they get absorbed into your body, and they do all sorts of bad things inside. So when you look at the studies, what the studies would show is switching to more plants. And as you start to increase the healthier type of bacteria, you can actually reduce the production of uremic toxins like indoxyl sulfate, like pre-cresyl, by as much as 50%. That is massive. Now, number 3 is what Michele was talking about, which is inflammation. Specifically, when we measure inflammatory markers like IL-6, IL-8, C-reactive protein, what we find is all of those things go down. So remember, if you're somebody on dialysis and you try to eat more protein, just by eating more protein doesn't mean your albumin is going to go up. Right? If you're in a very highly inflammatory state, you're in a catabolic state, which means that you're breaking everything down. What we're trying to do is flip the switch and make it more anabolic so that the protein you do take in, it gets used. It gets used to restore broken down amino acids and muscle that's breaking down. So it can do all of those vital functions that you end up needing. So lowering inflammation is very important. You also see that on a plant-based diet, because remember, the number 1 cause of death on a patient in dialysis is the heart, is the heart, is the heart. And so we see that the lipid profile also gets better. Now, the 4th thing that you want to remember is Michele did a fabulous job talking in a few episodes ago where we had our phosphorus part 1 Phosphorus Part 2, where we talked about things like inorganic phosphorus to organic phosphorus. We broke the organic phosphorus down into animal-based to plant-based. And we said how when you come all the way down from comparing animal-based to plant-based, plant-based has about 50% less absorption of phosphorus than animal-based does, right? And as a whole, you're talking about 20 to 30% absorption as the total amount of phosphorus that you're eating. So when you look at it from that perspective, on a more plant-predominant diet, your phosphorus levels are going to be lower. In fact, it's not surprising to see that when I have patients who actually switch over to this type of eating, whether they're 80%, 90%, or 100%, it doesn't matter. Oftentimes, I find that they have less need for binders. And the reason why we have this whole talk on binders and how none of the binders are 100% effective, if at best they're about 30% effective. So the rest is what we're doing from food-wise. But simple decisions like this can do that. The fifth reason is that as you're eating all of these plant-based foods, you're also lowering the risk of constipation going on, and you're increasing bowel movements. So as you have those bowel movements going on, what we know is that dialysis patients who actually have more constipation have a significantly higher mortality rate. Think about that for a second. If you're not able to go to the bathroom regularly, it actually increases your risk of death. And the mechanism is kind of unclear. There's lots of hypotheses. Maybe it's because if all of those waste products are sitting in the colon, there's more likely to be generation of toxins. There's more likely that those toxins will get absorbed in the body, which leads to more inflammation going on. Same thing with phosphorus. If the phosphorus can't get excreted out, in this case from stool, and it's just sitting around, it has more likelihood that it'll end up getting absorbed. And the last reason is that the fact that if you eat more of a plant-predominant diet, even though, as Michele talked about just now, which is plant-based diets are higher in potassium, right? You got your vegetables, you got your fruits and everything. Even though that's the case, the fact that you're going to have more bowel movements is going to help to facilitate the excretion of that potassium. So more often than not, my patients who are on dialysis, who do start incorporating more plant-based foods, because of all of these positive changes, we find that their potassiums are better controlled. And one plea that I have for all of you who might be on dialysis or know somebody who's on dialysis, if you're on hemodialysis, please don't cut your time, right? No matter what happens, don't cut your time. How long do your kidneys work? They work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're not off for Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, 4th of July. None of those holidays, they ever stop working. So they have to keep working. But how often do you do dialysis? 3 hours, 3 times a week? Or 4 hours, 3 times a week? That's nothing compared to the total number of hours in a week. So a huge plea is don't cut your time, because a lot of people think that if they switch to either a plant-based diet or do something else, it will translate into cutting their time. If it was up to me, I would ask my patients to dialyze for 6 to 8 hours at a much slower rate throughout the day. And that is the promise of the artificial kidney, which is the wearable kidney that's been in research for over a decade now. But when it does eventually come out, the whole point is that people can walk around and be dialyzed with this sort of belt pack that they would wear. So there you have your 6 reasons for why we think plant-based diets are so important for people on dialysis, and each one of those 6 reasons is based on evidence. So, Michele, let me ask you then. So now we know how important this stuff is. How does somebody start? How do they start their journey on incorporating more plants in their diet? And as they do that, what can they think about to make sure that the potassium and the phosphorus is okay?
Yeah, so the best place to start is kind of 2 things. One is knowing and understanding your labs and what your individual needs are. And then number 2 is working, ideally working with that dietitian in your clinic so they can help you meet your needs. And if you look at, I think the number 1 thing I would recommend is keep track for a couple of days, write down everything that you're eating and drinking, and bring that to your dietitian so they can review it through with you. If you don't have a dietitian, you can even look that over yourself. And So you can see where in your diet you can fit in more plant foods and make some substitutions. And if you need to do that in a way where it's lower in potassium, then I'd start with just simply adding more lower potassium fruits and veggies to your diet. So that can be, things like, cucumber, arugula, kale, jicama, green beans, bell peppers, onions, garlic. Fruit wise, we have apples, pineapple. Most of the berries are low in potassium. So starting with the lower potassium produce and adding that to your diet. Then when it comes to other things like protein, and if you're wanting to make a plant protein swap for animal, I do think it's important to understand what your protein needs are and that it's individualized for you. Because oftentimes, if someone's like, okay, everyone on dialysis needs to have 80 to 100 grams of protein. Well, if you're a smaller person, that might be a lot more than you need. And you might think, I need to eat all of this chicken and beef and meat in order to meet that. And that might be a lot higher than what you need. So, figure out what your protein needs are. Do you need to restrict potassium or not? If so, then we're focusing on the lower potassium plant foods. From a standpoint of protein, things like tofu, green peas, chickpeas are all going to be lower potassium plant protein sources. And again, like you had mentioned, the benefit of these plant sources is that the phosphorus is absorbed less than the animal sources. And then the other major tip I have with diet is overall reducing just highly processed food, fast food, junk food in general, because a lot of times people don't realize that their phosphorus and potassium is elevated because of beverages, fast food, restaurant food, and junk food that they're eating that has potassium and phosphorus additives in it. I think a really good example is some like French fries, right? We know French fries made from potatoes, they're already high in potassium. And a lot of times from fast food places, they also have phosphorus additives. They also have potassium chloride added. And so now you're just getting this like triple whammy. And, I've had someone when I worked in dialysis tell me that they couldn't eat cucumber because it had too much water in it, but they were sitting there drinking a Coke and eating a bag of potato chips. So it comes down to the choices that you make. And especially if you're making substitutions, you can easily swap, and beans come up, right? Beans are a plant protein source. They're a provide starchy vegetable. They're higher in phosphorus, but we know, most of that, or at least half of that is not going to be absorbed. And from a potassium standpoint, chicken, beef, fish, that all has potassium too. So if that's part of what you like, or you're trying to get more fiber in your diet, or it's a cultural food for you, then it's just simply what's the portion of beans that you can safely eat that meets your needs, that you either substitute for the animal protein, or maybe you reduce the animal protein so you get a little bit of the beans in there, and then you have a good combination. So I would say those are kind of the main things. But again, I would really try to utilize working with the renal dietitian that's in your clinic, but go to them, with, hey, I'm wanting to get more plants in my diet, or I want to do a more plant-based diet. This is what I'm currently eating. What are my needs? And then how do I do this? Or how can you help me do this? Because it's very doable. Like you said, if we can get better gut health, better bowel movements, less inflammation, we really do see that potassium and phosphorus and even fluid control improve while albumin improves. And that's without cramming. I used to hear there was a doctor that used to tell everyone in our clinic they need to eat 10 eggs a day and they need to have all of this meat and animal protein. And it's like the diet was really lacking produce and fiber and vitamins and minerals. And so people were, undernourished, but they were consuming very high calories of this, just less health promoting food. So that's why I would start there. Start with lower potassium plant-based options, look at what you're currently eating, and then work your way up. Start with the easiest meal. If you're like, okay, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm going into dialysis and my mornings are kind of busy, busy and shot, then where maybe it's your lunchtime meal when you get home. Okay, can you get in a little side salad or get more vegetables in with that? And then monitor your labs, monitor them closely. People on dialysis are typically getting labs done at least once a month, sometimes more often than that if they have, levels that are out of range. So make sure that you're monitoring your labs, comparing that to what you've been eating, and then making sure you're not having this influence of potassium additives and phosphorus additives coming from beverages and more processed food, fast food, because that's where it really can be sneaky and people don't realize they're consuming it, and that's what's driving up. And they might be told, oh, well, it's because you ate beans. Well, no, it's probably something that was added to the food that you were eating, not the beans or not the vegetables, because those, again, are going to be helping you and beneficial for you. Okay, so my last question then that I have for you is, are there any vitamins or minerals that people on dialysis can't get enough of or need to supplement?
Yeah, great question. And this is one that comes up a lot. And the simple answer is yes, you definitely need to think about your B vitamins, because every time we dialyze you, we're going to suck those out. So that's things like thiamine, riboflavin, vitamin B6, pyridoxine, niacin, folic acid, biotin, vitamin B12, and pantothenic acid. Those are your classic Bs that you want to make sure that you're supplementing with. Other stuff that is important and you need to be careful of is things like zinc. From a mineral perspective, is things like copper from a mineral perspective. And you need just a little bit because it's easy to become deficient on both going on. And of course, copper deficiency, you can get things like anemia and so forth going on. Other vitamins that you want to be careful of, you need a little bit, just not a lot. There's things like vitamin C, vitamin E going on. And of course, in our last episode that we did, we talked about vitamin K2. And that's something that's also we're finding that most patients on dialysis are very, very deficient on. So that's your general vitamins. So when you pick up one of the kidney-specific vitamins, you'll find that all of these things will be in there with the exception of course, vitamin K2. Now, other things that are also important, and it depends on your blood test. So meaning your nephrologist might ask you to take iron. So you may need it if you're anemic. And vitamin D is really dependent on your blood test. Now, remember, we recommend if you're going to take K2 with vitamin D. And vitamin D is something, if you take too much and you're on dialysis, then all that extra calcium that goes in is going to end up in tissues. So you don't want to overdo your vitamin D, like David, supplementation going on. You want to take enough to be able to get your level sort of in the middle of the normal range. And that's a good rule of thumb going on. Now, on the flip side is, well, what are the things you should be careful of? So first, vitamin C. If you take too much vitamin C, it will convert to oxalate. The oxalate will bind to calcium. So calcium oxalate will precipitate in your blood vessels. Now you got all of this calcification occurring. So you'll find that most renal vitamins, they will have a very small dose of vitamin C in there. And that's intentional because you do need vitamin C. You just don't need too much of that. Most renal vitamins will not have things like vitamin A. And that's because most kidney patients, they usually are not deficient on vitamin A. If you are, you only need low doses because it's easy to get toxic on vitamin A as an apple going on. So you want to kind of keep that in mind. Same thing with things like vitamin E. It's another fat-soluble vitamin, and it can also become toxic going on if you take too much of it. But really, in general, it's really the B vitamins, a little bit of C, a little bit of zinc, copper going on, a little bit of E going on. As you think about, taking a supplement, there's a few things you want to make sure. When you think about a supplement, you want to make sure that it is independently tested. It is a reputable company going on. If you're somebody who's following more of a plant-predominant diet, there are vegan options on there or mostly vegetarian options when it comes to this stuff. But some of the renal vitamins, they'll add things like herbs. The danger in adding things like herbs to a vitamin supplement is that we don't know how much is going to end up getting stuck inside your body that's not dialyzable, and we don't know the purity of that going on. So if you get a renal vitamin, stick to the renal vitamins that have the basics. We recommend, of course, K2 be added to that going on. Some of the vitamin varieties, they even add things like omega-3s in there. You can certainly have plant-based versions of that. That's alpha-linolenic acid going on. So you have options, but purity matters. Simplicity matters. And just because something has 10,000% of something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to do you more good. You're looking for something that's based on evidence, that's based on very clear guidelines.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think that over supplementation, oftentimes that's what comes into play, because we're looking for all of these things. Like, if I take this, what helps my kidneys? And we're Googling stuff, and then people end up over supplementing. But, we want to stick with the basic ones that you need. And again, there are those kidney specific vitamins, because they know we don't want high, a lot of B, just over the counter B complex, will have B complex with high doses of vitamin C, which we don't want. And so it's that specific, usually it's 60 to 90 milligrams is what you would find in like a kidney specific vitamin for a supplement. But again, before you take anything that is, outside of that and outside of what we discussed, make sure you're talking about it with your doctor, especially things like herbal supplements and anything like that. Because again, remember, your kidneys are not removing toxins and waste products 24/7 anymore. The dialysis is doing that 3 times a week, and toxins and waste are building up in between that. And so we want to make sure that you're not, having anything build up there. And I've had too, when I worked in dialysis, there was someone's husband was selling this like supplement from Mexico to some of the patients. And it ended up, we finally found out what it was, and it was crazy high in potassium. They didn't realize that it was, so some things potentially could be dangerous. So we want you to just be careful and cautious, but know that yes, there are some things that Dr. Hashmi mentioned that do need to be supplemented because you have increased needs or you increase losses on dialysis.
All right. I think this brings us to the end of this episode. So as always, guys, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for sharing this. We really appreciate it. And we're so grateful for the comments we receive. We would really appreciate it if you guys spread the word. We're also on Spotify. We're on iTunes for the podcast going on. And of course, we're on YouTube. And with that, we'll see you guys next time.
See you guys.